Picture a guy with a shiny resume that includes working for top-tier intelligence agencies, a steady job, and a picture-perfect family. That was John Crutchley on paper, the sort of man who seemed to have his life neatly squared away. Behind the scenes, though, he was busy swiping classified documents, conveniently hopping states whenever something important went missing, and engaging in a very offbeat pastime, one that involved syringes, restraints, and actual human blood. Then came Thanksgiving weekend, when a young woman decided to trust Crutchley for a ride. What happened next was so mind-boggling that even veteran detectives weren't sure what they'd just stumbled into. Was he simply a twisted sadist, or was there something far darker at play? And the real question, how many more victims were out there? They called him the Vampire Rapist. But before we dive into that story, if you like your true crime brief and bingeable, you're in the right place. Hit follow now for at least 2 new episodes every week. This is 10 Minute Murder. Let's get into it. In October 1946, in Clarksburg, West Virginia, William Crutchley and Mildred Burnside welcomed a new baby into the world. But this wasn't just any birth. It was supposed to be a do-over, a cosmic correction to the tragedy that had struck the year before when their daughter, Donna June Crutchley, went in for emergency surgery and never came out. Losing Donna shattered Mildred. When she learned she was pregnant again, she clung to the idea that this was fate's way of making things right. She didn't just hope for another daughter, she expected one. So when the nurses handed her a baby boy, the moment that should have been filled with relief and joy was replaced with something else entirely. From the second John Brennan Crutchley took his first breath, he was already a disappointment. His mother didn't see him as her child. She saw him as the wrong child, the baby she never asked for, the placeholder for the daughter she'd lost. And since nature hadn't given her what she wanted, Mildred decided to take matters into her own hands. For the first 6 years of John's life, she dressed him as a girl. If he protested, she ignored him. If he did something to irritate her, or if his father found a reason, the punishments were brutal. The beatings were frequent enough, but some left more permanent marks, like the times his fingers were burned with an iron. John would later recall that on at least a few occasions, they hit him so hard that he lost consciousness. John didn't grow up roughhousing with other kids or riding bikes around the neighborhood. He withdrew, spending most of his time alone, buried in books about electronics and technology. In a world where people had been nothing but cruel, machines made sense to him. They didn't judge him. They didn't hurt him. They did exactly what they were supposed to do. By the time he was a teenager, his obsession had become a skill. He repaired electronics for extra cash, and eventually that talent got him into college. He earned a bachelor's degree in physics, one of the few things in life that was entirely his own. But if anyone thought education would steer him toward a stable, productive life, they were about to be very, very wrong. By 1969, John Crutchley had checked off all the traditional milestones: college degree, marriage, a promising career in engineering. But like most things in his life, stability was just an illusion. His first marriage ended before he even finished his master's degree, leaving him free to reinvent himself. Again, he took a job at Delco Electronics way down in Kokomo, Indiana, working with cutting-edge technology. But when he abruptly moved to Fairfax County, Virginia, the company noticed something strange. Important materials had vanished. An internal investigation was launched, but no one could tie the missing equipment back to Crutchley, so he walked away unscathed. Then came a familiar pattern: a new state, new job, and a new wife. This time he was working for a major electronics firm in Washington, D.C., before yet another sudden relocation, this time to Florida. And once again, when he left, sensitive materials disappeared. Only this time, the stakes were higher. His employers weren't just tech companies. He had ties to the FBI, the CIA, U.S. Navy, and NASA. And when he left, he took classified information from all of them. If Crutchley had been a little more careful, he probably could have kept collecting secrets indefinitely. But in the end, his downfall wasn't a security breach or an advanced cybersecurity team tracking stolen data. It was a 19-year-old lady who fought to survive. Her name was Laura Murphy, and she was hitchhiking to Malabar, Florida. It was Thanksgiving, and Crutchley was home alone for the weekend. His wife and son had gone to visit family in Maryland. He stopped to offer her a ride. She accepted. She asked if he could take her home. He agreed, but he said he needed to grab a notebook from his house first. That was a lie. By the time Laura realized that something was off, they were already parked outside his home. He invited her inside. She declined. He didn't care. He attacked her, strangling her with a ligature until she blacked out. When she came to, she was naked, tied to his kitchen countertop. He had set up lights and video equipment, preparing to document exactly what he was about to do. Then, the real horror began. Crutchley sexually assaulted Laura, but that wasn't the only thing he wanted from her. Using syringes, he extracted her blood and drank it in front of her. Afterward, he dragged her to the bathroom, wrists and ankles shackled, and left her in the bathtub. Hours later, he returned to do it all over again. Then he came back the next morning. By the third time, Crutchley had to leave the house. He warned Laura not to try escaping. His brother, he claimed, would find her and kill her if she did. Laura didn't listen. As soon as she was gone, she climbed out the bathroom window and crawled toward the road, still naked, still bound at the wrists and ankles. Cars drove past her, ignoring the sight of a bruised, blood-drained woman struggling for help. But eventually someone did stop. She was so traumatized at first, she didn't even agree to press charges. But at the hospital, doctors determined that she had lost 40 to 45% of her blood. If she hadn't been found, she would have been dead within 12 hours. When she finally regained her strength, she told investigators everything, and that's when they got a warrant for John Crutchley's house. Inside the home, police found his videotape of Laura, though conveniently, the parts where he raped and drained her blood had been already erased. But that wasn't the only thing they uncovered. Tucked away in his belongings was a thick stack of index cards, each one containing names, addresses, phone numbers, and disturbing notes about his victims. Some were just personal details. Others listed sexual preferences and descriptions of their encounters. When investigators reached out to these individuals, a horrifying pattern emerged. Many described Crutchley's sexual habits as escalating from kinky to outright assault. The evidence was overwhelming. But for one FBI profiler, this wasn't just a case of a violent rapist. It was something much worse. Robert Ressler, one of the pioneers of criminal profiling, was brought onto the case. He didn't need much time to form his conclusion. Quote, "I was very glad they asked me to get involved, because while the police knew they had caught a dangerous rapist, I thought it probable that they had a serial killer in custody." To Ressler, this wasn't an impulsive crime. Crutchley had been practiced, methodical, controlled. The way he restrained Laura, drained her blood, and left no trace of his previous victims suggested this wasn't his first time. If others before her had been less lucky, if they hadn't escaped, then they were probably dead. Crutchley's ability to evade detection for so long pointed to a level of caution and organization rarely seen in offenders who strike only once. He moved across state lines frequently, worked in high-security fields, and had a documented habit of stealing classified materials without getting caught. If he'd applied that same precision to violent crimes, it was entirely possible that there were victims scattered across multiple states, women who had vanished without a trace, their fates buried in the gaps of Crutchley's well-documented but largely unexamined history. While law enforcement built their case, Crutchley had an unexpected ally, his wife. Instead of condemning him, she defended him. She dismissed Laura's experience as an exaggeration, claiming that she and John had engaged in similar encounters themselves. According to her, what happened to Laura wasn't rape or torture, just a, quote, gentle rape, devoid of any overt brutality. She genuinely believed that Laura should have been grateful, but public opinion and the weight of the evidence were against her. Realizing there was no way out, Crutchley pleaded guilty to kidnapping and sexual battery. John Crutchley was never formally connected to any murders, though investigators suspect he was involved in several across the country. For his crimes against Laura, he was sentenced to 16 years in prison, but was released after only 11. The very next day, he was arrested again for testing positive for marijuana. In Florida, this counted as a third strike, earning him an automatic life sentence. In prison, things got weirder. Guards discovered 13 genital piercings he had somehow managed to acquire behind bars. He died in March 2002. Officially, the cause of death was autoerotic asphyxiation gone wrong, which, honestly, seems about right. Thanks for listening to this episode of 10-Minute Murder. If you're a brand new listener, make sure you hit subscribe wherever you're listening to this podcast right now. Also connect with me on social media, any place that you are present on social media. And if you want to see the photos from this episode, you can go to 10minutemurder.com, click on the murder blog, and you'll see all the photos there. I am still putting them on Facebook and Instagram, but fewer of them go there because I've been getting strikes lately and stuff that's not even graphic or gory because, I don't post that kind of stuff, but I'm getting kind of tired. I can put whatever I want to my website, but on social media, I run the risk of getting my account banned if I put too much of the stuff there. I don't get it, but that's just the reality of the way things are now, I guess. So go to 10minutemurder.com, click on the murder blog, and you're going to see all the stuff there. And also on the website, you can email me. You can find my email address there. It's joe@10minutemurder.com. You can also sign up for the newsletter. You can do a lot of things there at 10minutemurder.com. But one thing I don't talk about on the website, I can tell you right now, and it's about my new podcast. It's not new, really. It's been around a few months, but it's 10-Minute Mystery. So it's basically the same vibe as this podcast, the brief and bingeable aspect, but it's not murder, it's mystery. If you enjoy that kind of stuff as well as 10-Minute Murder, you can go check that out any place that you're listening to this podcast. And that's going to do it. That's your episode for today. Thank you so much for listening to 10-Minute Murder.